Hello and welcome back to another video in the Complete Web Developer series. In this chapter, we are talking about JavaScript, and what we're going to do is we're going to talk in this video about something that makes JavaScript insanely powerful, and that is events. Now, there are things that happen every time a user does something. So for example, if a user clicks a button, that is considered an event. If a user pushes a key on their keyboard, that is considered an event. If a page loads, that is considered an event. There are tons and tons of these events that can happen, and what we can do with JavaScript is we can actually listen for those events to happen and then react to those by doing something when those events happen. So I want to show you just a couple of those events and show you some real simple examples on how we can use those events here in the video. So let's go ahead and switch over to my screen, and what I've done is set up a branch already for us to work on, and I'm going to create a new file here, and we'll call that v8.html. Then I'm going to do my boilerplate HTML here, and then for the title I'm going to change this to events, and then in the body here let's create our script tags, and then let's talk about the first event. So the first event that can happen is a page can load, and so what I want to be able to do is when a page loads, I want to react to that. So the way that we can do that is we can actually use our window object and then do a dot here, and then we could say add event listener. This add event listener can be added to any sort of element in the DOM. It could be added to the window, it could be added to a button, it could be added to an input, it could be added to whatever, but we're going to add this one to the window. The first element, when you call an add event listener method, you have to tell it what event you're listening for. So in this case, we're going to listen for the load event to happen. Once you do that, you have to give it a second parameter, and the second parameter is you have to pass a function in that will be called when that event takes place. So what we're going to do in this case is we are actually going to just use an anonymous function. Now an anonymous function is just a function without a name. Okay, so we're just going to write it in line, and we're not going to reference this anywhere else. So an anonymous function is just a function that doesn't have a name. Then what we're going to do is let's inside of here just console log window loaded. Okay, and then let's save that, and let's go to and visit v8.html in our browser, and you can see once the page loads and an event has triggered, and inside that once that event triggers, we triggered an anonymous function that had a console log that said window loaded. And let me get a drink of water real quick, excuse me. Okay, now another thing that we can do, and it's a little more interesting, is we can actually add elements to the body of the HTML. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to add an H3, and let's type the word clicked in here and do a space, and then let's add a span, and then inside the span here I'm going to give the span an ID equal to clicked. Okay, then I'm going to leave this empty inside that span, but inside of my script tag here, let's go ahead and set up a variable. So we'll do let I equal to 0. Okay, and then when the page loads, what I'd like to be able to do is let's plug in this I into this span here, and the way that we can do that is we can actually access the document by typing document, but instead of typing write to like we've seen before .write, we can actually do get element by ID, and what that's going to do is we're going to pass in a parameter with the text that matches the ID of some element on in our window or in our document. So in this case, this document.getElement by ID will find this span right here, and then we can do something with that. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do dot inner HTML is equal to I. So what this is going to do is it's going to take the inner HTML, which right now is empty, and set it to I. So if I save this now, what's going to happen is it's going to say clicked, and then inside this span, it's going to say 0. And if I right click on this and click inspect, it'll take us to the elements, and you can see that the span here has an ID of clicked, and inside there it actually has an inner HTML of 0. Okay, so now what we want to do is underneath this H3, let's add another little bit of HTML here, and let's add a button. And let's give this button an ID of clicker. And let's give it some text here of click me, and save that. Let's go back to our browser now, and let's see what this is. So now we have this button, and when I click it, it doesn't do anything, okay? But we have the button. So what we could do is inside our window load, we want to wait for the window to load so that this button has already been loaded on the screen. And then what we want to do is we're going to say document.getElement by ID, and this time I'm searching for clicker. Now this right here is going to find this button, but then we're going to do something with it. And what we want to do is add an event listener. So do .add event listener. And what event do we want to listen for? Well, in this case, we want to listen for the click event. So if they click it with their mouse or click on it with their finger on a mobile device or something, it's going to trigger something. Now we need to give it a function. And what I'd like to do is outside of this add event listener, let's create another function here. And we'll call this increment or incrementer. Okay, and this, what we're going to do here is, for now, all we're going to do is we're going to do I++, and then we're going to do document.getElement by ID, and we're going to find that clicked element again, and we're going to say .inner HTML is equal to I. So what's going to happen here is we're going to go back to this clicker add event listener, and instead of doing an anonymous function, we're just going to pass in incrementer as a function name right here. No quotes or anything, and we don't want to have the parentheses here because this would actually invoke this. So instead we want to just give it the function name, and when they click it, then it will call that incrementer function. So let's save this now, and let's go back here and refresh. And now when I click this, you can see every time I click it, it's going to increment I and then put that into the inner HTML of our clicked element. So every time I click this, it's going to change the DOM to update to show us that. And that is really, really powerful and cool, because now it allows JavaScript to interact with the user in such a way that the page becomes very responsive and dynamic. Now, what we could do, and I want to discuss this, is there's something called remove event listener. So at some point we may want to stop that from happening. So what we could do is inside of our increment function here, let's do a check, and we're going to say if I ever is greater than or equals 23, then what I want to do is I want to say document.getElement by ID, and we're going to look for clicker, and then what we want to do is remove event listener. And which one are we going to remove? Well, we're going to remove the click event, and then we have to tell it what function we're getting rid of. So we're getting rid of incrementer. Now what will happen is every time when the page first loads, it's going to add the event listener to this click element. Okay, when they click it, it's going to call this incrementer function. Every time it does that, it's going to increment I and then update the DOM here. This clicked span will get updated. Then it's going to do a check, and it's going to say, hey, if I is ever greater than or equal to 23, then what I want to do is I want to remove the event listener. So from then on and then forth, there will be no longer an event listener for click on this element. So the maximum we will be able to get to is 23. So let's test that. If I click this, it's working, and then when it gets to 22, I'm going to be able to click it one more time. Now that time when it clicked, it removed the event listener. So now when I click it, oops, what the heck? That didn't work. Remove event, and I have a misspelling here. I had a capital I there. You have to spell it correctly, okay? So let's go back and try that again. I refreshed, and I'm gonna get up to the 22, and if I click 23, that should remove the event listener. And now if I click it again, nothing happens, okay? There's no longer an event listener on this button because we removed it programmatically. So once they got to 23, we're like, look, they don't need to just keep clicking this. Now this is kind of just a dumb, silly example, but I wanted to show you how you can interact with the user. Now, the other thing that I want to show you is we can actually get an input, okay? And the input, let's go ahead and give this input an ID equal to first name. And then what I'd like to do here is I'm going to show you another way. Well, you know what? No, first let's just do this. And then let's create a function to handle when they type in this input, I want to do something. Let's first create a function. So I'm just going to create a function, and we're going to call this handle change. And I'm going to give it a parameter of event for now. And then what we're going to do is console log that event. All right. Once I've done that and the page loads inside this event load listener, let's add another thing here. And we're going to say document.getElement by ID. And let's find that first name element that we created up here, this input. And let's add an event listener to that. Well, what event listener do we want to add? In this case, I'm going to do a key up. Okay, so every time they press the key on their keyboard and then release it, we're going to trigger an event. And what event or what function are we going to trigger? Let's trigger the handle change function. Okay, so I'm going to save this now, and if I refresh, we have an input here. So if I push a C here, you can see that we console log the event. What is the event? So let's just go back to the code here and notice that anytime an event listener is triggered, it's going to call this function, and it's going to on its own pass that event into that function. So I have access to this event because it came from this event listener, and the event listener is going to pass that event down. So in this case, we are just console logging that event. Let's take a quick look at what that event is. Well, there's some information here. This is an object. The event comes in as an object, and there is all kinds of things here. So what did I click? Let's look at this first one. The first one that I clicked was the C. Okay, so it tells me, hey, does this bubble? True. Now don't worry about that, but the bubble thing is the events can bubble up to parent elements that may also have events listening on them, and it will also trigger those events. Okay, that's what bubbles means. You can see that the key that was pressed here was C in the key code. So if they push a button on the keyboard, we'll have that code. And then also, if you scroll down here, there's a target. Now this target is a node representation of our input. In fact, if I hover on this target, it highlights it in the DOM if you look up there. But the target then will have is an object that has all sorts of information on it. It has data sets, it has class name, it has ID, which you'll see as first name. But if you scroll down here to value, it has, this is going to take us a while to get to. The value at this point was C. So what was in that input? The value is C. So what we could do is, if we wanted to do something with that value that they typed in there, we could say event.target, which gets the node, and then we say .value. So this is just diving deep into that event. So the event.target will be the element that was triggered on. The .value, when it's an input, it'll have a value attribute, and we could set that equal to an empty string by default, or we could even say 1, 2, 3 here. And what will happen is, when I refresh, it starts off with 1, 2, 3, and if I do a key press, now you'll see that it console logs 1, 2, 3, F. that is the entire value. So when I type in here, it's going to continue to change and console log that. Now if I do a backspace, each time I push backspace, it will also trigger an event, because that is also a key up on the keyboard, okay? So it's important to understand that event that's passed in is going to be very similar for a lot of different things. Even when we did our click event, now that technically had an event that we could look at, and we could console log that event like this, and we could save that. And if I refresh now and I hit click me, you can see that now that is a pointer event instead of a keyboard event. And if you look at it, it will tell you all sorts of information about that event. It can tell you where at on the page the coordinates of the X and Y are. It'll tell you the pointer type. So in this case, it was a mouse. It'll tell you the type here, which is click. And again, the X and Y of that click event. It'll also give you the timestamp when they clicked it. So that is really, really cool information, and you may need to do that. Now in our case, in our incrementer function, I didn't really need to use that event because we were just going to increment I. So I can just get rid of, I don't need to pass that in. It gets passed in, but I'm not going to use it for anything. So I just wanted to show you that that is an option. Now, before we jump off here, just understand that there are many, many, many different events that happen, and we're not going to cover them all. I just wanted to show you how these event listeners worked and how you can trigger a function when you're listening to some sort of event to happen. Now, I'm going to show you another thing you can do here just because you'll end up seeing it, but it's not the preferred way to do events, okay? So what I could have done is, instead of doing the window.add event listener here, I'm going to comment this out for the click. And instead on this button, we could actually use an HTML element or attribute here, called onClick. And the onClick, what we would do here is trigger the incrementer function, and we would use the parentheses here, and we'd hit save that. And now when we refresh, even though it didn't add this programmatically, because this is added as an HTML element, it still does the same thing here. Now, why would we want to do this? Well, first and foremost, you notice that it didn't. Why wouldn't we want to do this is a better question. Well, because it seems a little easier. Well, the first thing you notice is because we didn't programmatically add the event listener, it wasn't able to remove the event listener either. So we can't remove an event listener if we do it this way. So it's actually more recommended to do it this way within JavaScript, because this actually, for one, it allows us to remove that event listener programmatically, and we could have done it a different way. It's not impossible to remove this, but it does give us the ability to do that, and it also keeps our JavaScript and our HTML separate. So you'll see that sometimes, but oftentimes it's not recommended, and it's better to do it here and add it with JavaScript than it is to just add it as an HTML attribute. The other one that I'll show you really quick is the key up one. So if you go to the input here, what we can do, I believe it's on key up, and we'll say we're going to pass in the function that we're going to call. In this case, it was handle change. Now, handle change in this case, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to pass this keyword into that. And we need to change this, because what happens when you do it this way is it passes the target down instead of the event. And so what we'll do is, instead of saying event.target, we could just call this target here, and then we'll say target.value on the console log here. So if I refresh that, this should have the same effect, and it does. But again, this is not the recommended way to do this. And for one, you can get more information on the event this way. So we'll change this back to event.target. But I just wanted to show you that you can add HTML attributes to the HTML to trigger these, but more accepted practice to do it with JavaScript. So I wanted to show you that first. But in case you see the on-click, on-change stuff as attributes, you'll at least know what it's doing and how it works. All right, guys, with that, what we're going to do is we're going to call it quits on this video. Understand that we're going to learn lots more events as we go through projects and as we need them and use them. But you can look those things up online all day. So there are tons of them. I just showed you a handful of them that are useful that you'll see all the time today. But the main thing to understand is that there are certain events that happen even when you change page or you close this, there's an event that gets triggered. So what that does is it allows us to interact with the user. When they do something, we get to respond to that programmatically and have something happen. That's the main thing that I want you to get from this video. All right, guys, with that, please comment, like, subscribe. Let me know what you're enjoying. Let me know what you're not enjoying. And we are going to continue to move on in the next video. All right, see you guys there. Peace out.